The I was not just only tortured that one time in the smoking room, and also I do not believe really that Russian man had anything to do with it. He was this young Russian person, and I think it's more likely that basically the smoke room kind of shook. It wasn't like something that he could have done with something on his person. I mean, maybe he could have done something small, but nothing that would cause a compression like that all of a sudden that would actually cause even the windows in the room to rattle a little bit. And as to why I was bleeding internally, I mean, like, is probably only explained by something like rat poisoning. I have not had any kind of experience like that aside from that time, and then I was tortured with while sleeping at a bunk there in the women's side, in the women's section. Basically, my legs, I noticed that nobody else was sleeping in the room when it happened, and my legs were being targeted. I was on the top bunk, and it was my legs were had the benign fasciculations throughout my legs, but it was like being heated. It wasn't, a normal leg kind of issue or nervous system problem. And then when I left, this one black man asked me if I wanted to get something to eat, so I said okay on a different day, and I left the hostel and I walked with him. He was wearing blue and white or blue and black, but I remember it was all blue and black, or blue, black, and white, something like that. And he took me to, he was a tall black man, a tall, sort of medium build to muscular build black man, and he took me to a Mexican restaurant, and I ordered something there, and then he ordered something, and we sat at this table, and then while he had his hands under the table, all of a sudden I felt something happen to me again, like similar to what had happened in the hostel that had caused me to bleed. And I started to get dizzy. Like, basically, I almost felt like I was going to pass out, but I didn't see black spots or anything. It was more like I got extremely dizzy, but I pretended like nothing had happened. And I remember that this man was watching me very closely the entire time, and a couple of the cooks, Mexican cooks from across the way, were looking at me too. Like, studying me very closely, I believe, to see what my reaction was. He was especially. And I remember his eyes changed, the look in his eyes changed after what had happened to me happened, and then he was really looking at me in a different way, like waiting to see what the effects were. And because I was kind of nervous about eating something from someplace, I only had one bite of this burrito, and then said I didn't feel hungry. And it happened after I had a bite of the burrito. For all I know, I was poisoned 3 times. I mean, it could have been that there was rat poison in the soup and in the Australian food and in the burrito. I mean, it's not impossible. I read later that if you ingest any kind of rat poisoning of any kind somewhere, that the effects are not noticed until about 2 days later. And if so, that would match when I had some of that soup at the Virgin Mary Vietnamese place. However, as to why I would have that explosive internal bleeding really being revealed when it was revealed is possibly it was just that I had internal bleeding and it wasn't triggered to leave my body until I had some other form of technology used against me, which caused me to need to use the bathroom. And I wasn't bleeding. I had no blood in my urine. There was no blood in my urine, and there was no blood from my woman's area, from that part of the body. It was coming from my stomach and going through my bowels. So that's looking to me like rat poison. And so I suddenly felt this kind of a jolt of something when I was talking to this black man in the Hispanic Mexican place, which was just a couple blocks up from the Seattle FBI offices. And I disguised it. I pretended like nothing. I had felt nothing. And I went to the bathroom, and I almost felt like I was about to pass out. I was very dizzy, and I couldn't see anything, hardly. And I felt like I was going to faint. And I just took a deep breath. I had bleeding in the toilet again. I saw that there was blood. It wasn't as much as before. It was a lot less. The bleeding was tapering off even by that time, so I do think that it was some kind of internal bleeding from something I ate, and then that the expulsion of that was triggered by technology that was causing other symptoms. And by the time at that time I thought maybe it was from what I ate, but it could have just been that the internal bleeding was dying down, but I still had some, and that whatever technology was used against me, that's what was creating this need to defecate instantly. I mean, I had to go right away. So then I went to the bathroom. I saw that I had blood again, even though it wasn't as much. And by the way, just to explain how much blood there really was, if you bleed into the toilet, there's enough water there that it would dilute it, typically. And the blood in the toilet was solid red. It was a lot of bleeding. And so I bled again when I was in the restroom and used the toilet, but not quite as much. And mainly I just felt very dizzy from whatever had just happened. I kind of felt like I'd been hit with. And blurry, but I pretended like everything was fine. So I walked out like everything was fine. And he looked stunned. And that was kind of a giveaway on his face that he knew something had happened to me, because he looked like he couldn't believe I was still standing. I mean, he looked shocked. Like he really could not believe I was still walking at all. And when I saw that he was shocked that I was still walking, and he looked like, I don't believe this, I can't believe this is happening, that's when I knew that he was definitely part of something bad. Because it revealed that he did know what had just happened to me. And he expected me to be falling over or something like that. And so I just said, well, I played it off like nothing had happened at all. I had no effects. And he looked deeply. I remember that right after it happened, he looked really intensely into my eyes. He leaned forward and he started looking into my eyes more. And I thought that was strange, because then I was, I was blurry. I had blurred vision, and I was extremely dizzy and sick. But I didn't reveal that to him. I didn't. I think I stumbled a little bit, like to the side, tiny bit, when I went to the restroom. But then I just controlled everything when I walked out, like no big deal. And I said, well, I'm actually just already had something to eat, and tried to blow it off. And then said that thank you, and I had some things I had to get done, and then that was it. And then he took off, and I was still feeling so sick and dizzy that I went up. I needed to find a hospital, and I wanted to be checked out for the internal bleeding because I knew I'd been poisoned. And when there was a woman who just happened to be there. at this cross section. And she told me she was Irish American. And so she took me to the hospital, and then I found out later that after she took me to the hospital, I hadn't said anything to her. I just said, I'm feeling kind of sick. Do you know where the nearest hospital is? And she said, I'll walk you there. So then she walked me there, but then I didn't realize I said nothing to her about what had happened or why I was going there. And I found out later that she defamed me to the hospital, saying that, oh, this woman, she was wandering and acting kind of crazy, so I brought her in. So she sort of smeared me. And I thought, if she's just a stranger, if she's a totally random stranger on the sidewalk, offering to assist me and really wanting to walk me to the hospital, why would she then make a point of telling the hospital staff once she's there? Why would she make a point of defaming me and saying that I seemed mentally ill or something when I hadn't said a word to her? It was almost like she was waiting there for an opportunity to defame me. And she basically refused to let me walk there for myself. She was insistent on walking over there. And so then I overheard her. That's how I knew. I came around the corner. I had to use the restroom again, and I came around the corner, and I had overheard her talking to the staff there, and then she left. But I heard her defaming me to the receptionist and the hospital staff right there. And this woman was standing there waiting for me. 3 blocks away from the Seattle FBI offices. She had dark brown hair. And once I was there, I got a room, and then I explained, I wrote on the form, said, why are you here? And I wrote down poisoning. And then I think in parentheses, internal bleeding. I'm pretty sure I just put poisoning down because I knew it was poisoning. But I can imagine that if I was trying to sound like it really wasn't such a big deal, I wouldn't have put that down, but that's really what it was. And so I and right now I have somebody doing something to my ear repeatedly as I've been talking. This has been going off and on for the last couple of hours. Pretty much since I started uploading some of the footage onto my computer, so it's been going on for several hours. But then it was a female doctor. Okay, then I find out that Virginia, the state of Virginia, is involved. Because I was at the Virginia Mason Hospital in Seattle, Washington. And the female doctor that met me, I later looked her up, and it was and I found out that she was seeing me, but there was another doctor who actually had his name on my chart for some reason. So it was kind of like she was seeing me on behalf of a male doctor, because it was her name and his name. And I don't remember if her name was specifically on the chart, but I saw that his name was. And I asked her, I said, well, who's my doc? And she said something about that. So I remember I looked at both of their names, and I did write about it on my blog, and I wouldn't know off the top of my head, but I wrote about it somewhere else as well. But one of them was from the state of Virginia, like right next to the CIA offices. And I remember that I remember thinking, that's interesting, because when I said that I had this horrible internal bleeding and I knew I'd been poisoned, and somebody had threatened me in Wenatchee previously and called me a rat, and she basically did an internal, by that time, as I say, the bleeding had lessened. Like, there wasn't as much internal bleeding. So even though this man did something, or something happened to me in this Mexican restaurant, it wasn't nearly like what had happened when I was in the hospital.